Sure. All right. Hello and welcome to the first uh, video interview of Melendy Avenue Review. I said I was going to do it, and I'm going to do it. And it seems that the screen, that the big window belongs to my friend Matt currently, and I don't know why that is, but it's fine. It's fine being that way. I think Matt is also very handsome, among other things. But
It's
what that should
true.
prove to you is that I don't really know what I'm doing with the technical aspects of the interview format. I like to think I could do an okay interview in terms of content, but just bear with us on the technical stuff. Uh, Bearing that in mind, what I thought I would have as my first group of guests are a group of people who know something about video games. And video games are a peculiar subject for me because I come from sort of a generation, in many respects, a subculture largely defined by its where the relationship with video games is one of the defining cultural relationships, right? So I was born in the mid 1980s. Video games were all around when I was a kid. A lot of my friends are pretty serious players of video games. I have some involvement one way or another with sort of the nerd subculture, and obviously video games are very important there. But I never really got that much into them. Part of this was biographical. My parents belonged to the strain of parenting in the early 1990s that held that video games were bad for children. It rots your brain. They have since seen the error of their ways, but it meant that there were no consoles in the house until I was about 10 years old. And then when there were, they were always kind of outdated. I did play a certain amount of PC games, and I think what that proved was even if there were video game consoles in the house, it wouldn't have mattered that much because I'm just very bad at them. I have difficulty paying attention to them. With few exceptions, I can somewhat pay attention to turn-based 4X games. I did play a lot of Civilization 2, but as they gained in complexity, I lost interest. I've enjoyed XCOM and other similar games, but again, I'm not very good at them. Uh, and a few other games like that that I've entertained, but not never really spent much time on. So me and video games kind of passed like a ship in the night, which was an interesting experience to have when you're otherwise interested in games like role-playing games and tabletop board games like I am. And many of the people that I spend time with are very passionate video gamers and interested in the culture surrounding video games. And I guess I'm interested in the culture surrounding video games as well, at least a little, because when my friends Tosh and Matt started talking about the culture around the video game Super Smash Brothers, I thought it sounded pretty intriguing. And I thought if I was going to have people on to Melendy Avenue Review to talk about the things that they're passionate about, talk about things that they know a lot about that I don't know much about, but that I found interesting, that would potentially be a good thing to do. So I've only played Super Smash Brothers a few times. I have some basic familiarity with it. It's sort of a group fighting game. You play a character from the Nintendo universe, such as Mario or Princess Peach or one of the Pokemon, and you engage in hand to hand combat. It's much less bloody and realistic than your Mortal Kombats or your Street Fighters. And there's multiple players, and there's a lot of kind of chaos going on, is how I recall seeing other people primarily play the game. So the sort of format here, or not even necessarily format, but the kind of lineup we've got here. So we've got the aforementioned Tosh and Matt, who are sort of follower who do play the game. Tosh has told me that he is the world's best player of Ganondorf, who is a character I've only heard of from him. Other people in the group chat act as though Ganondorf is an actual character, so I think it's not a figment of Tosh's imagination. Um,
Only
No.
half of it. Only half of the state.
Only half. Okay. And the other,
Shit.
our other two friends tonight are Philip and Jared, who Tosh and Matt recommended I talk to because they are apparently much more serious players of the game of Super Smash Brothers. They are sort of subject matter experts, if you will, to borrow from some official terminologies. So I welcome you all here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining me here on Melendy Avenue Review. And I think what I'll start with, I'll sort of pitch it more towards Tosh and Matt, but Philip and Jared can feel free to jump in. I remember Super Smash from when I was a teenager. I remember seeing other kids play it. And now I haven't been a teenager for some time. So what distinguishes Super Smash Brothers from other games? What has made it such an enduring hit that we're still talking about it today?
Well, if we're talking about its second iteration, Melee, which is sort of the thing that that Tosh and I were more specifically talking about, like that's a unique installment in the series and is mostly seen as having like a competitive. People disagree about this, but it's like the people who really like it, it's seen as having a competitive depth that is a lot more so than the ones that came after it, and it's sort of to the degree that kind of conflicts even with some of the branding of Nintendo as a company.
Okay, let's unpack that a little, just to make sure that people who don't know video games well are clear on what we're talking about. So Super Smash Brothers isn't just a game, it's a franchise.
Yes.
Right, there's multiple Super Smash Brothers. Probably the one I was seeing when I was a teenager was the first or possibly second installment. And so there've been installments on down the line, much as there's been installments of your Mortal Kombats and your Street Fighters and your Dooms and your what have yous. And Civilization, for instance, they're up to 6 or 7 or God knows what. So the idea is there is one of the games is called Super Smash Brothers Melee. When did that come out?
2001, December in North America, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's some
subject. 20-year anniversary, right? Or 19 or 20, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's 2001, we'll be on to its 20-year anniversary.
Yeah.
All right, so that, 2001, I would have been, December 2001, I would have been 16. So I guess perhaps I might have been seeing people play Super Smash Melee in the barn stalls, which will be a reference to many of to the 5 of us here, but might be lost on some Melendy Avenue readers.
Viewers will just have to,
Yeah, we grew up in a barn. That's right. All we were just amongst the goats and the horses. All right, so Super Smash Melee, and it's got a competitive element, you say. What distinguishes Melee from the others that makes it more competitive?
The other fighting games?
Or the other Super Smashes and maybe the other fighting games too?
Well, from the other Super Smashes, its depth seems kind of accidental. Like the people making it sort of knew what they were doing, but there was actually kind of a rush development, and there's this consensus that like if they had more time to develop it, they probably would have neutered it a bit more because it's stuck somewhere in between the limbo of a fighting game and a party game. So it was a game designed for children to be able to have like chaotic fun, and like other games, like other Nintendo games that are like that, like Mario Kart or something like that, they design it to have a large part of it is luck. So like which in some ways is kind of anathema to a competitive scene, because having luck in the game, it doesn't really make it competitive. Anyone can win, but it does make it fun for children, and it does level the playing field, which is they just want to facilitate people playing together and having fun. But Smash Brothers Melee is different because it well you Matt, you take that.
Actually, let's just unpack a little bit for a second for people who are less familiar with gaming. So you're saying that Super Smash Brothers as a franchise sits bestride kind of two stools. So there's a fighting game element, a la your Mortal Kombats, which people might remember from Moral Panics in the 1990s, if they were around then, really dating myself here, or your Street Fighters, or your Tekkens, or what have you. Most of which I know, do any of them this is getting off on a side, this could be a yes or no. Do any of those games have the multiplayer element? Whenever I see people playing them, it's always one-on-one. But
Like
with Super Smash, it's like 4 people.
It certainly depends. No, most traditional 2D fighters are going to be 1 versus 1.
Yeah.
And also, most competition you're going to see with Smash Bros. Is 1v1.
Oh.
It is unique in that you will have 2 versus 2 events.
Okay.
And in serious competition, you're going to be limited to either 1v1 or 2v2. But
Okay.
99% of all competition for these games is done 1v1.
Gotcha. All right. So Super Smash has the 4-player. Like when I go to parties and people are playing Super Smash, there's always 4 people.
Yeah.
But that's not how they do it in the tournaments. I see. All right. Well, that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So thank you for answering the question. So there's a fighting game aspect, and then there's the aforementioned party game aspect. So your party games like your Mario Party, for instance, which I guess would also be a Nintendo property, seeing as it has Mario involved. Or now you have these games that you kind of play on your phone that you connect up with, like your Jackbox, what's it called?
Jackbox.
Jackbox.
Not Jack-Off-Box.
Not Jack. That's every other use of
Yeah.
That's very, you don't know Jack, though, to be honest.
Oh yeah,
Right.
You don't know Jack. I remember that. That's
Well,
also
that
from
Jackbox
the 90s.
is based on that.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. That's opening up the map some. All right. Very good. So it tries to be a fighting game that's also a party game. And that's how you see at some of our friends' houses, people crowded around the GameCube or what have you, button mashing away with Kirby and Ganondorf and various other Nintendo characters I did not grow up with, other than by osmosis. Would you say the earlier games before Melee successfully melded those two concepts?
Yes.
Okay.
There's only one iteration before.
Okay.
Before
So it goes
Melee.
Super Smash Brothers and Super Smash Melee.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by comparison, Melee is a lot faster. It's kind of as speaking as someone who's like a lot more casual. That's like the first thing I think that people who play the series will notice.
Right. So faster means when you hit a button, things happen more quickly?
Yeah, the movement in general.
I see.
Like the animations of the characters.
Okay.
The fall speed. Because physics are a big part of those games, which kind of it's a unique feature of that's not as present in other kinds of fighting games.
Yeah.
Because one thing I should just mention here that was sort of a unique feature of the first Super Smash Brothers and all the subsequent ones that kind of distinguished them was that whereas in most fighting games it's about like you like hit an opponent into submission because they have like a health bar that you whittle down. Super Smash Brothers, it's the goal is to knock them off. You're on a stage, kind of floating in the sky, and you're trying to knock somebody off a stage so that they fall to their death. And as you hit them, they become lighter and they fly.
I see.
So it changes a lot of the that alone changes a lot of the mechanics and sort of like the nitty gritty of how people play fighting games, because certain combinations of moves or whatever, like combos and stuff, are more contextual than they would ordinarily be because the physics of the game are like the characters are heavier and lighter, and so like that stuff is in flux, and so it requires a lot of creativity.
Yeah.
And in Melee, because it's faster and it has a lot of glitches that I think we might be getting into. Those elements make that creativity more demanding.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So yeah, so you have the traditional fighting game where you're whacking away at each other and you want to master various combos to hit the other guy enough that their health bar goes away, versus Super Smash. And my understanding from what you said earlier, because I'm trying to tease out the party game versus fighting game distinction, is that in most traditional fighting games, luck doesn't really enter into it. Whereas, Nintendo games in general, it seems, and the original Super Smash, from what you're telling me, did have a luck element, right, to try to equalize things, which would allow. So for instance, if I show up at a party to play the original Super Smash, I'm obviously at a massive disadvantage because I probably haven't played it in 15 years and I didn't play it much and I'm not good at video games, but presumably there's some kind of a luck element that would help keep me in the game with the original Super Smash that's not there in Melee.
So it's a little different than that. It's not specifically luck. It's definitely, this is a complicated question.
Oh boy, okay.
But the original game is a simpler engine. There's less ways that you can practice moving in precise, advanced ways that will give you an advantage. The movement is simpler. It's not simple. There is still quite a bit of depth to the first one, but it's less so than Melee. And so the time it would take you to learn how to properly move in that game is much less. So you could be the amount of time you have to put in to reach the level to be able to play it with someone else who knows these things is much lower.
I see. Yeah, I was going to try to compare it to another Nintendo game that people play at parties, which is Mario Kart. And I have played a certain amount of Mario Kart. I actually had a Mario Kart 64 emulator at one point, because I do remember having enjoyed Mario 64 Mario Kart 64 when I had it. So I have logged some hours on that one. And yeah, if you're behind, you get the blue shell. When you hit the power-ups, and then you can really whack somebody with it, et cetera, somewhat equalizes things. But here it's just sort of the game design that equalizes things a little bit more. But they kind of threw that out in Melee, is my understanding.
Not necessarily. There are still items. There are still like if you're playing a four all game with items on, it's going to be somewhat luck based.
Yeah,
but,
I should just add in there that items are a thing that in any iteration you could turn on or off.
Okay.
And those items are kind of randomly generated and kind of just fall into the match.
Okay, so while you're fighting it with your three friends, then the Nintendo gods rain down some sort of item you can use and hit each other with, or heal up with, or what have you. Okay.
And you can control what items get dropped and the rate at which items drop. Like you can control the amount of that you want in the game. And the Melee competitive scene doesn't have any of that. There's no items. There's no like the competitive scene is not necessarily the way the game was meant to be played, but it is a way that the game has allowed people to play it. So over time, like certain maps and like certain features were like whittled away, so like there's only like a set way of playing Melee competitively that doesn't involve like so much of the other parts of the game that were to be enjoyed by children, essentially.
Okay, so a map, just to be clear, map is like the arena you're fighting in.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, like your background. I see. Okay. Is the one in your background popular with tournament players?
Very
No.
banned.
It's very banned.
Very
Okay,
banned.
I see.
People don't like oh, I'm mirrored, so this is hard. People don't like the turtle
I
or
see.
Or just the asymmetry of the thing.
Actually,
I see.
the biggest
plot
issue with that
thickens.
stage is the platform in the center, because you can't fall through it, but you can hit from the bottom of it, which promotes people to sit on the sides and sit under it, and no one has a reason to approach. It really creates this dichotomy where the players are at an advantage if they're waiting for the opponent to approach, and that never creates a healthy competitive atmosphere because you're both going to sit there.
I see. I see. It's like in Risk, where one player starts out in Australia, he just piles up all his guys in Australia, and nobody could go get him in Australia, and then eventually just. I hate Risk. It's
terrible.
Not a good game.
Not a good game. I'd rather play Monopoly, honestly.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
a lot of these competitive scenes are basically they ban anything like that and eliminate it to try to get the most kind of fairness or whatever, or level the playing field in that way, and obviously toggle off items. And that's true of like any competitive scene of any of the Smashes, not just Melee. I forgot the point I was going to make. Something about one thing I wanted to say is just that when Melee came out, like I don't like esports and like people, that wasn't like an established thing.
No,
really.
certainly not.
Yeah, this is 2001, so
right.
I don't remember there being such a thing. Maybe there was. I remember there being a movie in the 80s or 90s about a child going on a quest to
Maybe for StarCraft or something.
Competitive StarCraft, competitive Counter-Strike, those were in their infancy.
Okay.
What movie?
What were you gonna say, Tosh?
What movie was that?
I don't know if I even saw it, but it was like a quest movie. A child.
I think that's.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, he was the best Nintendo player,
right.
and he needed to journey to the Nintendo Olympics and play the Nintendo to achieve his destiny. But yeah, so Tosh, you made an interesting reference about the way the game was meant to be played. So there appears to be what we appear to be getting towards is one of the things that drew me to the subject in the first place, which is the conflict between the fans of Melee, Super Smash Melee, and its creators, the Nintendo Corporation. So what did Nintendo have in mind when they created Melee? Did they just want to update the original Super Smash, like kind of a fun party fighting game?
Yeah, they certainly, what they didn't want was like a largely male audience in like people entering their like adulthood or like aging through their adulthood, sort of dominating it and taking it really seriously. I think was pretty much not what that's what.
Okay.
I mean, they also got the thing that they wanted.
I see.
I mean, Melee, just as much as any of the other parts of the series, like kids played it. Like the people who grew into competitors were all casuals at one point, and in every iteration, like you can enjoy it on that level. But I think they didn't anticipate that phenomenon happening, and I think that was sort of in addition to the audience that they were expecting to get, and I think that was sort of for them a blemish on it.
So Rumi, just quickly, Rumi Ed, my roommate, who can hear me blathering, apparently, has sent me a text message informing me that the movie I was thinking of is The Wizard from the year 1989. So I don't think I've seen it. I would have been pretty young when it came out, but perhaps I'll have a look-see. So Melee sounds like was a pretty big hit, both in the intended audience and then with a more serious audience of gamers, like pretty serious gamers. Did it take on right away, or did it take a while for Melee to become as popular as it eventually became?
It's been pretty constantly growing. In the first few years, competitive play wasn't really a thing. It wasn't until maybe late 03 that we saw the first tournaments, and then we still had items on them. We hadn't defined these competitive rule sets, and it was tiny. It was in people's basements. And then 04, 05, there was a little bit more growth, but it wasn't until MLG Gaming probably picked it up. I think that was 05 or 06, that there was really this big explosion and competitive games were becoming a big thing.
I see.
But there was definitely a period where it was only really played casually for the first year or two.
So was that M as in Mike or N as in November LG Gaming?
M as in Mike. Major League Gaming.
Okay.
Which I think still might be present in some
maybe
way, shape, or form. I haven't seen them in a while. 2015, I think, was the last I heard of them, but they might be.
How did it? Sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
I actually wanted to sort of feel the question was just sort of like, how did that scene work prior to having like an actual like official capacity, like when it was in the period of like people playing in people's like basements and stuff? Because I've seen stuff about that, and it's like, it's interesting to me because it reminds me a lot of sort of like when people talk about like DIY music and stuff like that, and like hardcore and that sort of thing, of just like people crowding into the houses and like doing a lot of organizing for something that doesn't really have a lot of support, I guess, besides just people who like it.
Yeah, it was really a grassroots scene. Everything was organized entirely by people who were active and involved, and there was no profit to be made. It wasn't, people weren't even focused on that. They just loved the game, loved the idea of competing at it. And so it would be in a kid's basement. And one of the earliest ways people organized was through the website smashboards.com, which was just an internet forum that I think emerged in early, it's got to be 2004, 2005.
Sounds right.
And everybody, eventually you find your way there, whether it's word of mouth from a friend. I found it because of Google Video in 2005, and it was because Philip had been beating me the previous summer in this game. I had never run into someone who really gave me such a trouncing as Philip did. And then I was, at my grandparents' house doing nothing, and this is like before YouTube. So, Google Video had just come up. I just started to search Super Smash Brothers Melee, and I found this like hour-and-a-half crew battle from a tournament called FC3 that happened in Chicago. And I just like watched it over and over again and was trying to figure out how they were moving so fast, because they just looked fast. And from there, online research led me to Smashboards, and that's kind of where it all started for us. And I think a lot of people at the time.
Yeah, I remember looking at, Googling about the games that I liked, like Civilization 2 and Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, which Alpha Centauri is a great like sci-fi game. Like, it's a good game, but it's also just an interesting like sci-fi story on top of it. And just finding out exactly how much more competent others were than me at it did not cause me to study further and become good at it. It caused me to say, fuck it, I'm just going to play a chieftain until I get sick of it and quit. I guess that's the difference between me and a real gamer. So you use the pronoun we, Jared. So it seems you were sort of present for this early period. So I imagine you got involved via these boards that you found.
Yeah. So that would have been still, I guess not that early, but 2006, which seems
Mhm.
pretty old now. And the scene was still pretty small. And I wanted more of this. So I got involved in tournament organizing pretty early
Okay.
at a local game store at the time in
Mhm.
Framingham, actually. And
Game Underground?
Game Underground, which,
Nice.
well, it was Game Universe at the time. And
Yep.
Game Underground nowadays. And I think they're still around on Moody Street in Waltham.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I mean, also it was like I had a tournament in my parents' house basement, like set number of people. We had a group of friends, but we were like running anything we could anytime just to get a taste of it, whatever it was.
So you say in the beginning you had not developed the conventions that would later govern the scene. So for instance, you had the items dropping down, and I imagine perhaps Tosh's background had not yet been banned. So did I imagine that developed kind of organically over time?
Yeah, definitely. I did play with Tosh's stage legal, at least for doubles. But items, I never played with items on, but it was really over time, we ruled out more and more different things. We saw people abuse them in tournament play, take advantage in a way that we said, oh, that doesn't seem like healthy for what our ideal vision of competitive play looks like. It's not that it's absolutely more fair. Sometimes it might hurt one character more than another character, but we all had this kind of there was very rarely much argument amongst organizers as to this is, we want healthy, fast-paced, aggressive fighting play.
That's interesting. Was there much in the way of pushback? Were there people who were like, I like defensive and non-particularly aggressive play, or?
Not super frequently. I mean, what comes to mind when you say that is there was one character in the game that had an infinite combo. They could get a grab, and that would always result in a kill if they performed their inputs correctly. That's the ice climbers, and we called this technique wobbling. That's been the most controversial. Is wobbling healthy for competitive play? Is wobbling, it's not even for competitive play, because people think ice climbers are still balanced with this technique. They're not unfair, they're not too good. But it creates a bad viewership experience. Nobody likes to see it. It's defensive play. It's the same thing over and over again. It's not exciting to watch. And that's always been one of the main arguments for banning it. It's also not fun to play against. They have a lot of personal.
All right. I just got blue screened of death in the middle of Jared telling a very compelling story about banning a given character's move. So a lot of these characters I've heard of, who are the ice climbers?
Ice Climber was an NES game. I think it's very early 90s. It might be 1990.
Okay.
And it was just a 2D platforming game where you tried to get to the top. It's pretty difficult. And they never had another game, and I don't think they ever will. But
1984 was when the game came out.
1984. So it's not even NES. That was like Nintendo.
No, it was NES.
It was NES?
Yeah, it's NES.
Oh, so that's
something I want to say on that note of like where the ice climbers came from, that I think is sort of relevant if we talk about sort of the direction of the Smash games, is like in 64 and Melee, the idea was it was like an all-stars thing, all Nintendo, and it would have like some deep cuts. So like Ice Climbers is something like that, where it's sort of like, yeah, it's a game from a million years ago, and there was never a sequel, and they're in the game because it's like it's a celebration of Nintendo's.
Right. So what you're saying is, just to clarify, so 64, that's the original Super Smash, and then what the format for the characters you could play, it was always, like you said, the Nintendo hits like Mario and Captain Falcon and whatever, and then a few deep cuts like the Ice Climbers.
Right. And that's not so much like it's not so much like that now, which we can get
yeah, let's get into that when we get into
the
the way Nintendo has carried the franchise forward. So Jared, what happened when you banned the Ice Climber's special move?
Okay, so I banned it. It was very personal. It was a little bit aggressive. It was to maybe spite the players.
Totally supported by me.
Everybody, all of my friends hated losing to this, that no one was having fun. I was the organizer. You know, I did it with 2 other people, and we said, okay, let's try banning it. Let's see if it makes a difference. Let's see what it's like. Anyways, I like having it banned. Now, then it actually started some discussion, and there were certain states. It probably depended on like who was playing the character and how much of a threat they were, and how much people disliked it, how much they thought it was a viewership problem. Certain places banned it, they unbanned it. Certain major tournaments banned it, they unbanned it. It was always, is it unfair to the players who play it and put the time in and practice, or is it bad for viewership? And is it a problem if we're going to be looking for sponsors and grow these conventions and that kind of thing? Do we need to get rid of it to keep it exciting? It is now pretty universally banned, but it took over 10 years since the technique existed, almost, I think 13 years afterwards, when the 3 biggest tournament organizers nowadays decided to universally ban it.
That's interesting. What it reminds me a little bit of is the many different pressures on mixed martial arts rule sets.
Yeah.
Because you want to have an exciting product for people to watch. At the same time, you want to keep your fighters healthy enough to keep them coming back. And you also want to, like I said, have an exciting sort of fight. So, there have been times in the history of mixed martial arts where things were so thoroughly dominated by grapplers, which to especially like American meathead audiences look vaguely gay and not very compelling, that they're just not sure what to do about it, and they change rules around and they do this and that, or wrestlers, for instance, right? I mean, it is possible for a wrestler just hold you down for an extended period of time, and that's not always compelling TV. But it gets into politics, it gets into all kinds of weird stuff. It's dominated largely by one company, the UFC, which kind of is a segue into how did Nintendo ever enter into the Melee tournament world?
So Nintendo didn't really ever pick up as a sponsor, actually, I think until maybe late Brawl or Smash 4. So I think when it came to Melee, they had a very firm, you guys do your thing, but we don't want to hear about it. We don't want to be a part of it. And a lot of the time they were actively trying to shut down streams. Was that EVO 2011? I want to say maybe 2013.
Yeah.
That was when the Melee community had made it into this large tournament after raising over $100,000 for breast cancer research. That was kind of how they decided what the extra game was going to be. And then the day of the tournament, Nintendo sent a cease and desist for the live stream so that there could be no viewing audience.
So just to make this clear, this is like a gaming showcase, like a gaming convention?
Yeah, it's the largest competitive fighting game tournament. It also functions as a convention. It definitely
for a variety of fighting games.
Right. So it's like, okay, you've got your Mortal Kombats and your Tekkens, and then you could elect or have one extra. And the Super Smash Melee people were like, okay, we've raised all this money for breast cancer. We're legit. And they were like, okay. And then Nintendo said, well, if you do that, we won't let you live stream?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and an important detail there is that by that point, there was already a third iteration of the series that I assume they probably wanted more attention for that, which is Super Smash Brothers Brawl.
Right, yeah, I was going to ask, why would they do that? But it appears, like you said, so we have the original Super Smash, and there's Melee, which gets picked up by all these hardcore gamers, and then you have Brawl. And they wanted people to stop paying as much attention to Melee and pay attention to Brawl.
It's unclear. We never had any direct information as to that regarding Nintendo's views. It, in a lot of ways, in my personal take, looks like Nintendo, especially Nintendo of America's law team, just being very protective of their brand and how it's showcased. It wasn't necessarily a Brawl versus Melee thing. Maybe they would have considered it more if it had been a product they were currently selling. Very possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a feeling it would have been the same thing. They saw this as negative press, and even if it had been Brawl, they probably would have been shutting it down. Because they weren't involved, they weren't in control. This wasn't Nintendo commentators. And at the time, at these live streams, there would be profanity. This was for an adult audience. People were not limited to radio style, broadcasting or something. It was very grassroots still.
So for those who don't know about it, what is sort of Nintendo's way of presenting itself, and why would that be such a problem that a few gamers were swearing while playing their game?
So Nintendo has traditionally and always been the family brand when it comes to gaming. They market to children, they market to parents with children, they market to maybe young teens. They don't want to show their teenage or adult audience. That's never been their target brand. That's their incidental brand. They are focused on the family, and they have very much always had that at the forefront of all their PR decisions, which they are very protective and aggressive about.
Interesting.
I think it's worth noting too that its competitors like Sony and Microsoft are very much about those audiences. Like if this had been on Sony, or like if this had been on PlayStation or Xbox, I don't think it would have been a big deal. I think those companies would have tried to capitalize on it.
Yeah, there's a deliberate. I almost like compare like Nintendo kind of aims to have almost to be like Disney. And it's supposed to be family oriented. It's also supposed to be timeless. It's why they have all these kind of exclusive characters to their consoles that are their games. The aspect of difficulty is always of the games. The challenge is always kind of difficult because like you hear people, everybody's heard about like older gamers being like, oh yeah, the games used to be harder. And that actually was true because the old games were still operating off the model of like how arcade games were designed, and that like which were supposed to be really hard, so that like you would like lose and you would pay more. So like games are still and I don't want to get too derailed here, but like one thing that like people know at this point is that like certainly by the time of like the Super Nintendo, the trend in their design philosophy was they would like make a great game and then edit it, like sort of like what Tosh was saying earlier, to make it like easier. Like that sort of like reports of that happening is sort of like they would just make something really solid and play test it and then be like, oh, this might be a little too hard, and then work kind of from there.
Specifically, Japanese developers making games for an American audience, because there was more at the time, especially at the time that like Melee was made. I think the difference in the markets between like Nintendo Japan and Nintendo of America was that Nintendo of Japan was willing, there's a market for difficult games, whereas in America, not so much, especially with the family aspect, because you're marketing it towards children.
Yeah, that kind of relates to a point. Yeah, I think like Tosh said earlier that the game's kind of Super Smash Melee was kind of rushed. You said,
yes, because it had to meet. It was going to be. Was it a launch title for?
It was very close.
Yeah.
It may actually have been a launch title. It was very close. It was definitely intended to be, and it was done under serious crunch. to the point where they had the directors down in the programming area, really doing play testing. It was all hands on deck.
So yeah, just to unpack that. So what that means is Nintendo is coming out with a new console, the GameCube, and they wanted Super Smash Brothers Melee to be packaged or otherwise available for the GameCube early on, and so they rushed making it. They didn't play test as extensively like they did with other games, with an eye towards making them easier for kids, casual gamers. That's very interesting. I mean, that's I think that's one of the, I'm remembering some of this now, and from hearing it from Matt and Tosh, and I think that's one of the things that drew me to this story was this idea that, okay, just a chain of consequences, right? Like due to whatever caused the production schedule to not line up, the usual production issues that come with any large project, they can't play test Melee. As a consequence of that, it gets picked up by these hardcore gamers. It becomes a big phenomenon with them, which then in turn, they become too enthusiastic for it and become this sort of nightmare for Nintendo's family image when, they want to display themselves playing the game with great ferocity, both on and off the screen. So that's very interesting. And just a quick aside, so they made Brawl, and I think one of you also alluded to a Super Smash Brothers 4. So Melee is at least 2 back in the order.
It's now 3.
3 back, so there's a Super Smash 5, I take it.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to take it from the fact I've heard very little about them, that the hardcore gamers have not taken to them in the way they have taken to Melee.
That's actually not quite true, actually.
Oh, okay.
I think there's been a serious shift, and the divides that used to exist between the Melee community and other parts of the Smash Brothers communities has actually really converged in the last generation. And there's a lot more people who play both games, or at least highly respect competitive play of both games. And both are taken very seriously by a very large audience.
Okay, so there is a community of like competitive play for Brawl and the other games.
For Smash Brothers Ultimate is the newest one.
Okay. Was there one for Brawl or for 4?
There was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lot smaller than Melee for the most part. When it came to Brawl competitive, there were a lot of people who picked it up and dropped it quick. People took it seriously enough and played it for long enough and explored it that it became very interesting. It was a strange game, in fact, probably more buggy than Melee in a lot of ways. But it was definitely a slower paced, more defensive endgame, as people kind of predicted. So it didn't draw the same crowds or excitement from viewership in the same way. But the people who played it were very passionate, and some still continue to be. Not that it's
interesting
as often.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what is there a lot? So you say they've kind of converged. So Melee players now respect Ultimate players and vice versa. Yeah. But I take it that was not always the case?
Certainly not. I think it was a huge divide. I think that the Melee scene, I'd say both sides were probably equally responsible for, and the scenes were pretty young and people felt like they had a lot on the line to defend. And this is also primarily online text-based communities.
Right, yes.
And it was a little bit aggressive. People were not very nice to each other, not very understanding, not okay with people playing a way that was different than they were.
And the other thing to keep in mind also, again, in all this is just like people playing competitively for like money too, and being like, yeah, if you are like a pro, keeping your game alive and like being the game is like it has more weight to it.
Yeah. So was there significant I get that there were probably significant practical differences between the games. So there's significant kind of community differences between the players of I want to call it Vendetta for some reason.
You think of Def Jam Vendetta, which was
yeah, I played that game a few times.
Instead of playing as Nintendo characters, you played
it's
as
rappers. Yeah, I played that. I played it as Danny Trejo, who's not a rapper to the best of my knowledge, but he's certainly a tough customer. I actually really enjoyed that game. I seem to remember.
It's good. I think I don't know if there's a scene for that game, but it's definitely a playable game.
Yeah, but sorry, Melee. Was there a difference between the kind of culture that you found in competitive Melee versus the culture you found in Ultimate, or were they just sort of fighting over, like, was it kind of a star-bellied Sneech situation?
There was certainly an age difference. I think a lot of the people who played Brawl, Smash 4, and eventually Ultimate competitively, it was because that was the game that they started with and grew up with. So I think there was a noticeable age difference most of the time. I think then a lot of the Melee community kind of used that seniority idea to play the bully a little bit sometimes. But I think fundamentally at their core, they were pretty similar scenes, doing similar things, fending for themselves, playing these games competitively. The organization was similar. They were intertwined, even if they didn't like it. They were both organizing with Smash boards, eventually with like Smash GG, the same online resources, but they didn't like each other. That's for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk a little more about the specific culture of the Smash Melee scene. So early on, it has this DIY aspect. It's people in basements, and they've gathered together the converted, the believers in this game. And I have heard it did manage to make its way to me before I heard Matt and Tosh talk about it in the group chat, the intensity of play, right? People are moving, your little Marios or what have you, your Ganondorfs are moving very quickly along the stage, the scene, and my understanding is that things get heated. Is that I guess this is where we get into where we're throwing meat at the audience. So if you've got any good insight either into why things get so heated, which would be the respectable part of the meat, the white meat, I suppose, and if you have any particularly interesting or amusing heated gaming moment anecdotes, we can throw that as red meat to the Melendy Avenue review audience.
I don't have so much in the way of like the professional stuff, but my roommate got like really like audibly like angry at me when we were just playing together, and it totally took me by surprise, and like we're both very casual. I think at least part of that's the psychology of it, like ostensibly being combat. And like the concentration and having to do all that stuff like really quickly, so like you have like an adrenaline rush or whatever, but like you're not actually moving. So it's all gets expressed kind of like at the end, whatever it plays out. But there are a lot of more like prolific heated gamer shenanigans that aren't just my roommate getting like a little annoyed with me.
There are compilations. If you go on YouTube and just look up the Salt compilations, there are just compilations of players at tournaments like ripping their controllers out and smashing them and going on tirades and like destroying property at the tournaments. Like it's some people get really hyped up on it, and like there has never not been a time playing this game when like being in an intense match hasn't made my heart rate like noticeably quicker. Like it really is like a you know, the tension that gets built up even as a casual player can be pretty intense.
So Jared and Philip, have you what's your emotive experience?
Yeah. We have some stories, but I think people don't like losing. I think that's step one. I think that kind of goes in a lot of places. Some people handle it differently than others, and I think it can build a lot of emotion. But even among friends, playing in your basement in a totally friendly way, both trying to improve, things can get a little heated. And
definitely true.
especially if there's maybe a little taunting going on, maybe a little bravado, and someone doesn't feel like they're performing as well as they should. A lot of people, that's the problem, is that they expect I should be beating this person. It's not I need to play my best to beat them. It's I should beat them no matter what. And they get stuck in that mindset, and then their opponent improves, and suddenly they're going even or losing, and it doesn't feel good. It feels like you're falling behind. And I think that kind of a lot of the time feeds it. But I've had a friend. I haven't ever gotten into a fist fight, but I've had a friend raise a fist and almost throw a punch. Philip actually once beat a player, Dave Zosa.
No.
And Dave had been playing 3 or 4 years longer than us. He was a bit older than us, and he was, at the time when we started, one of the higher ranked players in the scene locally. And when Philip finally beat him, that was like for him such a low point that our friend later told us that he had gone outside and thrown his controller in a creek.
Wow.
There's like controller throwing, slamming is actually like a fairly common thing, even at like a professional level, I think.
Yeah, what the thinking you should be able to beat someone thing reminds me of. I like the board game Diplomacy, which, if you're not familiar with it, it is a game set in kind of pre-World War I Europe. It's the 7 major powers of Europe. And the basic premise of the game is you start out with roughly equal forces, and somebody, in order to win, has to take control of half the board. And with 7 players, the only way you can possibly do that is by making alliances against the other players and then breaking them. And Diplomacy is notorious for the scheming and backbiting and general bad behavior that it encourages. It was actually very popular in the Kennedy White House, if you can believe it, when it first came out. So I was introduced to it when I was a very high-strung middle schooler, and I really couldn't handle it then. Basically, I would cry, like I would be just awful about it. But then I went to the school that most of us went to, or possibly all of us, and started playing with people there. And because I was friends with those people, it never really bothered me so much. And I generally learned not to underestimate people pretty quickly. But what would get me, and this is partly due to the structure of the way the game is played. So it's the turns of Diplomacy, it's turn-based, and they're synchronous. So what you do is you write down your orders for your troops. You have troops and fleets and stuff on the board, and you write down what you want them to do, and you hand them in to like a game master, to one assigned player, and they read them out, and all the moves happen at the same time. So especially like mid-game, you've got a bunch of troops, you feel you're in a good position, and you're starting to feel yourself. You're starting to feel, yeah, I'm a fucking strategic genius. I'm doing real good. I'm Clausewitz. I'm Napoleon up in here. And then you turn in your orders, and you're like, this turn's going to be great. And then you realize that you made some sort of mistake, or you overlooked something, or somebody backstabbed you when you weren't expecting it. And then it's less that I'm angry, even if I'm getting backstabbed, because that's the point of the game. But I become angry at myself. I become angry at that person who thought he was Napoleon for a minute. who really thought he was master of all he surveyed. And that's what the dynamic reminds me a little bit of. And they've never made a really good diplomacy video game. It's pretty hard. At this point, I think there are diplomacy apps. If you can get 7 players, it's not bad. It's really hard to make a diplomacy AI that's any good, but that's neither here nor there. So as the scene grew,
I just wanted to say one thing actually in relation to sort of talking about the salt or whatever.
Yes.
And especially like people throwing controllers and stuff, is like it actually means more than I think the average audience might appreciate. Is that like, your controller is special to you because only you use that controller. Like, how it works. People buy extra controllers, they do things to them, all that stuff. So like when someone is angry enough to throw that controller, it's like, there's a lot of emotion in that.
Yeah.
Well, especially nowadays too, where it's so much harder to get like, a GameCube controller that works right, or that like doesn't cost a ton of money.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. They don't make GameCubes anymore, do they?
They've continued rerunning different productions of the controllers, actually, all the way through Smash Ultimate, because they created an adapter for it. But most of the competitive scene doesn't like the newer controllers.
Oh.
Because they have slightly different analog function, like the ratios that it reads are slightly different. And the feel of the springs on the Z button is different. It's all little things.
There's also all that business of like with Melee with the controllers that you pay someone to. Nice, Tosh. You pay pay someone to like cut little notches around the stick or something.
Yeah.
What does that do?
So some people will want. So I guess it started with a technique called shield dropping. I don't know how much we can really get into it, but things came up that were so precise and so difficult, but so important from a competitive standpoint that everyone had to learn it. But then we learned that some controllers can do it more easily than others, just depending on how the cuts were, on how the shell was assembled. But you could go into a game that was modded to check the angles on your controller, and people would file in notches. So if you held your control stick into this notch, you would always hit this precise angle to be able to do the precise technique.
Oh, was that allowed?
It currently is really in discussion. It's been allowed. A lot of people didn't do it. They said, oh, I don't need to do that. But then suddenly, wait, people did it. And those people who did it are getting good. And it's a discussion that is very much currently still happening.
So everybody brings their own controller to a tournament.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I almost expected that they would just hand you a controller, like a standard controller.
No, it's too personal.
Oh, wow. Like, I'm trying to think of other sports. Like, do they let you
use your own bat in baseball?
Tennis?
Yeah, and then there's also scandals in baseball where people used cork in their bats.
Bats, yeah.
There's been a couple of cheating of macroed controllers, people getting banned.
I'm trying to think, like, sports that involve precision instruments. Like, I actually have no idea about this. In the Olympics, they have shooting sports of various kinds. Do they let you bring your own gun, or do they give you a gun? Or
I think it's inspected by a very the trained people to inspect it.
Yeah.
We'll look
there's
over
like
it
hockey and golf,
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
But it is a scene where, like, I'm assuming at this more serious Smash tournaments, they do, it's like more rigorous. But I have heard things about like people who brought their own like secretly custom modded Super Smash Brothers, and then like played tournaments as Pichu and did well because they actually like vamped Pichu's moves or whatever. And for people watching this who don't know who Pichu is like a I don't know the Pokemon game so well, but it's basically like a younger version of Pikachu, and he's a terrible character in Super Smash Brothers. Like, he's not tournament viable at all.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess that makes sense given that the Nintendo people didn't create the game with tournaments in mind, that not all the characters would be useful.
No, they're not particularly balanced.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I can imagine with the salt element of the game probably didn't help make it respectable in the eyes of Disney.
No.
Nintendo, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Disney.
They can be a little interchangeable for this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it was the salt, whether it was packing, 40 people into a 100 square foot basement, whatever, nothing about it looked respectable in terms of business, brand building, and marketing.
But it did grow to become more of a thing with like conventions, both conventions, as I've been using the term, like, agreed upon rules, and conventions as in big gatherings of people. So is that where is it today in terms of the scene? Like how big is it? Is it filling out, convention halls, or what's going on?
It depends. Like in terms of tournament entrance for Smash exclusive events, the biggest ones you'll see might in like 2,000 to 3,000 entrants.
Oh.
And also, people will bring friends or
yeah,
whoever else. So it could be
vendors and
people
stuff.
Come to view as well. That's like the largest. A lot of the time you'll see it tacked on with other events, and I mean it's not uncommon though to see 1,000 entrants. And some people run weekly or bi-weekly tournaments that will get. I know in Massachusetts we get 100 to 150 entrants sometimes. Sometimes maybe 50, but.
Yeah, it's not bad.
And it gets new players too.
Yeah.
That's like, it's not just like the people who grew up with it. It's like basically, yeah, like there was like a documentary that, people have different issues with this documentary, but the thing that happened was that a lot of people who like wouldn't have played that game saw that and was like, oh, and got interested. And kind of it did kind of create like another generation of people playing it.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, so how has the growth in the scene and kind of it aging changed the dynamics within it?
I think there's been a real effort to up the professionalism in terms of presentation and live streams. I think there are people who it is their business to be live streaming it, to be running these events, and they're taking cuts, of people paying their fees to enter the events and things. So I think the professionalism has just gone up and up and up, and it always has been growing. There may have been a small time after Brawl's release and that year after where people weren't sure, oh, it's not going to survive, there's a new game. But then we realized, oh, we just have to keep running things. And then it will quickly picked back up, and it's really been growing ever since. And there's been surges based on different events. But I think it's, esports has grown in general throughout the world. It's becoming more respected, more professional, and just more marketable as a brand than it initially was as an underground insider scene.
Sure, yeah. You mentioned rankings. Is there like an official body that maintains a ranking system?
There's a few of them.
Okay.
So it's not like we have one and that's our association and everyone respects it. But I know Panda Gaming has a big, well-respected list, and so does MIOM. I think that's what it is. Melee It On Me was kind of the original. I think Red Bull did rankings at one point too. Those are the biggest three that I think continue rankings. And, those will be, if you go to a wiki page for a player, it'll show what their ranking was from the MIOM ranking.
Okay. Interesting. So if one was to, presumably once the vaccination situation becomes a little more widespread and, it's safe to go to such an event, what would be stuff to like watch to like look out for to get the most enjoyable experience as a non-Smash player if one were to go to a Smash Melee tournament as a spectator?
Interesting question. I mean, I think just the excitement around like the finals and the top eight and watching, you might not understand the intricate details, but it is pretty easy to pick up as viewership because there's two people on the screen. It's one versus the other, and you can kind of see who's doing better after looking at it for not too long. And if that's interesting, then you can get into learning more of the nitty gritty. But the commentary is very good. But I think, yeah, probably just like viewership for top eights. I know there's a Smash World Tour coming up in the next year that's going to have like a $250,000 prize pool for Melee and $250,000 for Ultimate. And they're going to be running all these regional events leading up to a big one. So it's like kind of the first real circuit we've had in many, many years. So I think that's going to be exciting, and people can follow players that they like. And I know
which is all like really encouraging news given like other stuff that's happened over last year.
Yeah, definitely.
Are you talking about not just the stuff with Nintendo, but the stuff in the community?
I was specifically talking about the cease and desist.
The cease and desist. What occurred?
So that was it was actually interesting. Nintendo cease and desisted their own sponsored event. So the Big House was set to run a tournament this year, and obviously it's COVID. And the way Melee is currently played online is through a client that we call Slippy, which is not official Nintendo hardware. It's software on the computer. The game doesn't have online functionality, and it's base set. So we use Slippy to play competitively with very little lag over the internet. So because of COVID and the event going entirely online, they were still going to run their Melee portion of the event using Slippy. But Nintendo, and I think the reason it was on their radar is that they were the main sponsor for the event, actually. But they ceased and desisted the tournament organizer and just said, you can't hold it. And obviously everyone's kind of been in an uproar since. They have not done anything since that. That was now last.
Yeah.
So did they cancel the tournament?
They did. They canceled the tournament.
So Nintendo didn't like Slippy.
They didn't like Slippy. Exactly. They didn't realize that people were going to be using emulated online gameplay. As far as we can tell, that's really where that cease and desist came from. And when it comes to playing again with actual GameCubes or Wii's in person, I wouldn't expect that response to be the same.
So they associate Slippy. So Slippy's an emulator, so they associate that with piracy?
Exactly.
I see.
Not only Slippy an emulator, but to actually play it, you have to get a ROM, and there are legal ways to get a ROM, and that is the vast minority of ways to get a ROM. Very easy to pirate a ROM.
Yeah. When I had my Mario Kart 64 ROM, I think just if any of you guys know Charles Holbrow, just typed something into my computer and I had it, and I don't know whether he did it legally or not, and never thought to ask. So there's a cease and desist. That's interesting. And you mentioned players and their Wikipedias, and how you can follow these players. I imagine they must have Twitters and social medias and whatnot.
Yeah.
Who are like the more interesting personalities that somebody should know about if they are trying to penetrate the world of competitive Melee?
If we're specifically talking about Melee, I think all of the top 25 players are all pretty interesting to me personally, at least, and a lot of them keep a pretty big online presence. I think Leffen, TSM Leffen, Cloud9 Mango, and Golden Guardian Zane are three of my favorites right now.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you got to mention Liquid Hungry Box and Tempo X, and I've just forgotten a bunch of names that should have been mentioned in that group.
Well, the gods certainly.
Well, yeah, the gods, but the gods are a little less active right now.
Yeah.
So what distinguishes, I guess, beyond? So it seems as though from the outside that there would be a pretty big scope for different individual play styles, correct?
Definitely. Game's
So
very expressive like that. You can really play
yeah,
in a lot of ways the way you want to play.
yeah. So like those three guys you named first, Leffen, something about mangoes, and another one.
Leffen,
What?
Mango, Zane.
Yeah, what are their play styles? What distinguishes them?
All right. Well, Mango's like, I think in everyone's mind, he's like he's the guy. He's, the cool kid. Everything he does is the way you want to play Melee. He is entertaining. He's always playing for the crowd. He's aggressive. He's nonstop action. Everyone, likes to watch him play. And that's always been his thing. He's always kind of done it his way and made it work. And it's very entertaining. Leffen really represents a European Smash Brothers at this point, actually, Melee. And he is methodical. He is always makes the best decision that he can in the situation. He's always trying to practice and grind out what's the best option here. What's perfect play look like? How can I get as close to that as possible? And he's always, watching his footage to try to improve himself. Zane is like, he's a hard one to pin because he's got a little bit of both of them, but he would tell you he's like Leffen. He's come up in the scene incredibly fast. The level that he's obtained and the time he's done it is unheard of, and there has to be a certain level of natural talent to that. But he puts the hours in. He plays more than anybody else. There's no doubt about that. And he's very entertaining to me and not that much like Leffen, although he would say he is. And I think he's got a little bit of a lot of people in him, but a lot of it comes down to his natural talent and just how quickly he learns. And the way that he learns is very unique because he's always focused on one thing at a time. And that's why I think by adding that together, he says, I'm going to master one thing and I'm going to do it only that thing and focus only on it and think only about it until I know exactly how to use that one thing. Then he moves on to the next. And he built himself like that as a player. And the end result is very unique, actually.
Interesting. And just for point of reference, how old are these guys?
Mango is our age, me and Philip's age, 29. And Leffen's a little younger, right? 27.
I think that's
yeah,
right.
26 or 27, I think.
And Zane's like young, because Zane's like 23, 24 maybe?
Yeah. So I think you're right.
Because Zane didn't even play the game until like 2015, and he's one of the people who watched the documentary.
I see.
2013 documentary, and he had never played the game at all, and he thought that was the coolest thing and got into it from that.
Not to keep dragging it back to mixed martial arts, but one of the most famous MMA fighters, one of the best fighters ever, John Jones. He was a college wrestler. And he started doing MMA because not a lot of money in college wrestling once you are out of college. And he would just see shit on YouTube and just do it. Interesting guy. But so most of the people playing are in their 20s, you would say?
20s,
or
I think 30 is there are people in their 30s also. There are people younger, rarely. But I think it does happen. There certainly were more back when we were playing.
Yeah.
But I think
and mostly men is my understanding.
Yeah, mostly, but not entirely male dominated, but very, very high.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? I remember. I hope this doesn't. Well, maybe I do hope it causes a fight because that could make for good YouTube. But I remember one of you, Tosh or Matt, referring to a big player as the Tom Brady of Smash Melee, like undisputably very good, like one of the greats, but like just a nothing burger personality. Is that accurate? Did that happen?
Yeah, it wasn't so much like my own personal assessment, but that's sort of like that's the reputation. I was talking about Hungry Box, and just sort of being like, it's like, yeah, he's objectively really good at the game. but like it's very frustrating for
Yeah,
various reasons.
Hungrybox is an interesting case. He is currently rank 1 before COVID hit, at least. He is the most polarizing player. You love him or you hate him. Most old school Melee players do not like him very much. Myself included, really. I don't like watching him play, and I don't really like what he brings to the table outside the game either. But he does have a huge fan base now. And
so what stylistically separates the old school Melee players such as yourself from the new school Melee players?
Well, there's certainly, when we played, it was playing aggressive was the way to play. If you didn't play aggressive, people would even invalidate that. That's, it doesn't even count as a win if you're camping. It's lame. It's not the real way to play. Nobody wants to see that. It was, you'd get bullied for that, really, in a way that was not healthy at all.
Yeah.
Still might happen now, but much less frequently do I see it. And Hungrybox played in a way that people didn't like. He plays one of the slowest characters. He plays in a way that is very low paced. It involves a lot of patience, a lot of hard decision making, but slow decision making. It's not usually the most exciting for most people.
So the slower character, is it Bowser?
It's Jigglypuff.
Jigglypuff. Okay, I know Jigglypuff. That's a Pokemon. I thought it might be Bowser because he was one of the slower Mario Kart guys.
You can just forget about Bowser. He doesn't figure into anything here.
Yeah, you'll never hear about Bowser.
You'll never hear about Bowser ever again.
Okay.
Another thing about Hungrybox that I've heard is sort of like never played friendlies, basically. It's like never ever just casually play with anybody.
That's like trade secret type stuff. Like if you play friendlies, then people know how to beat you. Like I've also heard that that crew, like the gods and whatever, they'll bring people who are good Jigglypuff players to the tournaments. They'll like pay for their flights and stuff just so they'll have someone to play in friendlies who's good at Jigglypuff just so they can go up against Hungrybox.
It's like a train, huh? Right. Yeah, that's actually a logistical question I was thinking of. How do they, can you play like Mario versus Mario?
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody can choose whatever character they want. It's not a logistical issue.
Yeah, but some people like to say that they like to trademark a certain costume. There's you can in Melee, it's really lazy. Like I'm Red Mario or I'm Blue Mario. But some people will play big matches and the bet will be you can no longer play this character with this costume. If I beat you, this is I'm forever gonna be Blue Fox, and that's just the deal.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. So I have two kind of actually no, before I get into that. So I take it from your verb tense usage, Jared, that you no longer play competitively.
Well, it's actually interesting. Just before COVID hit, I'd entered 2 or 3 tournaments in the last couple of months before that, but I had taken a break pretty much since I'd gone to one tournament in 2016. And then before that, I think it was 2014. And I was not active the way I was from 2006 to 2011. That was really when I played consistently and seriously. And I've always played since then, just not in the tournament scene.
Right. Are you still involved in helping organize tournaments?
No, not in a long time.
Okay.
Still occasionally get questions from people.
Yeah.
And I sort of, I know the people who are currently doing it, but I haven't.
Yeah. Philip, are you still playing competitively?
No, I would go with Jared. Sort of the two of us. We definitely were known to be. We would actually play doubles together. And enter a lot. And then so it would be Jared and I would be going together. So no, I never. I think I went maybe once or twice to something that he didn't go to, but other than that, I haven't pretty much the same timeline that he's on.
Gotcha. So I guess I have 2 questions left, and one is kind of a silly question, so I'll just ask that first. I'm so used to, I don't think I've ever seen anybody play 1v1 Smash Brothers personally in my life, and I've never seen anybody do 2v2. It's always been the big brawls. Is there any interest in that on a competitive level? Is just people just like completely throw that out the window, or?
Well, it's soft. I mean, I will tell you, Philip and I, we really like to play competitive 3-player, or at least I liked it. I don't know if Philip liked it. When we would have our friends come over, and there were 3 of
was
us.
silly.
Said, you know what? Let's play 3. And we
3
knew
player.
it was silly and stupid, but the thing is, you're just rewarded for not engaging. The 2 people who are fighting are the ones losing. You know, every time.
Yeah, you've got to be Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah, the person who's standing there waiting to maybe pick up a free stray hit, that person's in the lead at that moment. So if you think about it from what's going to make healthy gameplay, anytime you have 4 people on screen, the person who engages the least is building a lead by doing nothing. If the other people are injuring each other, you're winning. And it's very hard to regulate that in any kind of way that would make you not. Because waiting and being patient and playing with the space is such an important part of the game. You can't just say, oh, you're not allowed to do that. There's no way to enforce it. So just because of that, from a fairness standpoint, you can't make it work.
Yeah. One of my favorite board game series is put up by GMT Games, and it's a series of board games that are meant to model counterinsurgency wars. Actually designed by a guy who designs games to the CIA originally. And what they do is they're asymmetric. So each player in each of these games has a different goal. So if you're playing the one based on the Civil War in Colombia in the 90s, right, the government player and the FARC, the communist guerrilla player, both basically want to control the country, whereas there's also a player for the drug cartels and they just want to pile up a bunch of cash, and a player for the right-wing paramilitaries that just want to slaughter the communists, and also everybody has to keep everybody else from winning. And with 4-player games, there's a few different ones they made with 4 players that work pretty well. And I know they're trying to do some with 3 players now, but I have difficulty seeing how that would work without just 2 of the players ganging up on the other one, which is a shame because a lot of, I studied the history of insurgency and counterinsurgency warfare in grad school, and a lot of historical insurgency and counterinsurgency conflicts are basically 3-way conflicts. So that, for instance, described the war in Northern Ireland, right? You had the IRA versus the British government versus the Protestant paramilitaries, right? None of them actually really got on with each other, right? Notionally, the British and the Protestants were kind of on the same side, but not really. And there's many more examples of that. So yeah, a 3-way game is always really hard to make balance.
It always turns into, hey, he's got less of a % on him. Let's gang up.
Yeah.
But then, that alliance being tenuous is still disadvantageous to the people who are more damaged or whatever in Melee.
So I guess my final question would be, or at least my final kind of substantive question would be, is there still room for the kind of DIY video game tournament scene? Or has esports become so professionalized and so dominating and so kind of, risk of sounding kind of lame, kind of corporate, was the Melee thing kind of unique, right? When you think about the series of accidents that created it and formed it, or is there still room for that kind of scene to develop?
Did I go?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Melee was in its exact form was very unique, and we probably won't see something identical to that. But in terms of underground and small-time gaming tournaments, I actually see it more and more these days, whether it be, on Twitch TV, people running tournaments for their user base, subscriber tournaments for any competitive game, for newer, games and stuff. People are always looking to engage in a competitive way on some level. And I think that it doesn't always have to be in the biggest corporate, I want to be the best in the world kind of way. And I think that there's actually a lot of good resources now for people to be organizing that, a lot of good ways to put a tournament together that weren't there, and it lets people do it more easily. So I think it's always going to be happening. It might not be the same kind of movement that is becoming something, and you were on this wave and you could really tell, and everyone was in it together. But I think, there's always room for more competitive gaming.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's actually like a nice, encouraging thing. So in other podcasts and YouTube videos that I see, when they have guests on, they usually ask the guests, have you got anything to plug? Does anybody have anything they want to plug while they have the ears of possibly dozens of people?
Just that I'm the best Ganondorf in the world currently and forever.
Is Ganondorf, presuming that Tosh didn't make him up, popular in tournaments?
No.
He's
Not
right
really.
in the middle.
Okay.
He's right like borderline. Like
He's on the cusp of
see him.
being an okay character.
Yeah,
Okay.
you saw him more a long time ago. You see him less now.
Okay. But other than Tosh's Ganondorf boasting, anybody got anything to plug?
I guess I better plug None, because None is the best Ganondorf. There's no doubt about it. Slash None
Wow.
N0NE.
He's a tournament player?
He is. I think he's top 10 in the world right now.
Oh, okay.
Main's Captain Falcon, but his Ganon's good.
Okay.
Shout outs to the New England melee scene and the people organizing and keeping it alive, because it's making me very nostalgic and thinking a lot about them. And they're out there every week, and now they're doing it online still. And you can always look up your local melee group on Facebook. Just put in Massachusetts Melee or Boston Melee, wherever you live, you can find them. And there's probably a local scene out there. And if you're interested, it's cool.
Philip, got anything to plug?
Nah, I don't think so, really. I mean, I'm sort of on the same boat as Jared, so
Yeah. Matt, you have something to plug.
You're right, I do. I kind of forgot. Yeah, I have a band called the Leafies you gave me. I know that doesn't overlap too much with like gaming, but that's kind of like when I'm pulling from the thing about comparing the DIY stuff. It's because like I kind of more experience with that. It's like a theatrical, like avant-garde rock band thing with 10 people. I sing and I dance in it. We have an album. It's on Spotify and Bandcamp called Off Broadway. It's very it's a lot of different stuff. Eclectic. I hate that. Yeah, whatever.
It's a great album. I listened to it. I recommended it on MAR before. It's really good. Go listen to the Leafies you gave me. All right. Well, I wanna thank all you guys for coming on here and talking my dumb, pretentious humanities ass through the world of Super Smash Melee. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for
having
having
us. Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Good night.